Well, we're inside of the cab of the UP-844 steam locomotive here at Kansas City Union Station. We're going to just walk through and just kind of give you an overview of what a steam locomotive cab looks like. For starters, this is a very special locomotive, and in many ways, we like to think of this locomotive as the railroad equivalent of Air Force One. Just an iconic locomotive with us, but also as with many hundreds of thousands of citizens across America. And with that, back in 2011, we started a process of working on the locomotive and making it ready for the next 30 years of its life. And as we did that, as we go through the various mechanical aspects of rebuilding the locomotive, we always try to keep it as original as we can, but like with any old piece of equipment, there comes a time when you just need to replace various parts. And one of those things was the floor. So you can see right here, we've got a new cab floor, and beneath the number plate is an area with air brake components and what we call a safety control system. So we can take that number plate out and access air valves and other parts of the air brake system. The steam locomotive requires two people to operate. A locomotive fireman, and as the name implies, his job is to maintain the fire. And an oil-burning locomotive, that fuel oil is controlled by a regulating valve called a firing valve over here. And it's a very simple process where the fuel, the oil, flows by a head pressure, or mainly gravity, to a burner, where it flows over a burner and it's atomized by a jet of steam, and that's that hissing sound that you can hear in the background. When the locomotive begins to produce horsepower, when we actually start to move, then the fireman's job really begins. And the technical name for the process of maintaining the power is called maintaining the evaporative rate. That's the rate at which the locomotive is developing its power. You're actually generating the steam, heating that steam or heating that water into steam and evaporating it. Very, very powerful steam pressure at 300 psi, and that's what gives a locomotive its true power. The fire burns nearly 2,000 degrees, in some cases a little bit hotter than that. On the right side over here is the locomotive engineer, and we have a few modern necessities in the American locomotive cab today. A modern radio system, and this device tells us the air pressure on the end of the train. This box here allows us to control a diesel locomotive that we can couple behind us. So we've got a lot of versatility with the steam locomotive. Over here we have the air brakes. This was part of what we rebuilt as well when we did the complete rebuild of the UP-844 from the boiler perspective. The cab frame and everything's all rebuilt, a new floor, all new piping, lots of air piping and steam piping and all the various valves. Steam locomotives look complicated, but when you work around them, you serve an apprenticeship where you begin to understand how the locomotive works from a very fundamental level. And you continue to build on that apprenticeship as your career progresses. Generally, it takes, depending on a person's skill level and their experience, it takes several years to become a proficient fireman. And it's necessary to become a very proficient fireman before you're an engineer. Locomotive engineer has the responsibility of the train, controlling the movement of the locomotive and train, complying with all the various myriad rules that the railroad has. The railroad's always had lots of operating rules and operating procedures. And in addition to that, you're managing the locomotive cab, keeping the steam pressure where it needs to be, and again, most importantly, maintaining the water level. So it's a concert between two people. The locomotive engineer and the locomotive fireman work as a team to operate the locomotive. The other side of that is a limited visibility. You have not much visibility out the window. And typically on a steam locomotive, it's very hot in here, so that oftentimes you'll see the crew hanging their head out the window. That does two things. It gives you better visibility, but you can also hear the locomotive, see the locomotive, and smell the locomotive in its operation, and you get acclimated to the locomotive. So it's all those various senses that you're using to operate the locomotive. It's a fascinating machine, very well-designed machine. It's truly a pleasure to operate. It looks very complicated, and there's a lot of physical effort required, But once you get it into a rhythm, it's a very graceful locomotive. And for those that get to see the locomotive move when we start to get ready, it's a very graceful machine. For as big and powerful as it is, it's very precise, and it has a certain gracefulness to it. So thank you very much.